All right, good morning, seniors. Happy Monday. Today I am just going to give a really brief overview of all of Act 1 of Othello, kind of do a review for you guys, make sure you're all on the same page, understanding everything that's going on in the play so far, just make sure everyone's caught up. So this will just be basically a comprehensive review. I'm not going to do any literary analysis just yet. I'd want to kind of let you guys do some of that on your own, but I do want to provide an opportunity to review the play, go over, summarize some of the stuff that's happened, make sure you all are understanding it okay. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the historical context of Othello, just to make sure that you guys kind of understand some of the tensions that are happening right now. So Shakespeare's time, remember that's like the 1600s. Where he lived in Europe, there was a kind of racism that existed. It wasn't so much based on skin color as much as it had to do with religious beliefs and religious dissent. So a lot of kind of the conflict that occurred in that time in Europe had to do with Christianity versus other religions, specifically people who were of the Muslim religion. So Christianity versus Muslims had really strong tensions. There was a really bad kind of feud there that existed that would lead to bloodshed, that would lead to violence, that would lead to kind of warfare over these differences in religious beliefs, but it also did inevitably lead to some racial differences because of the inherent differences in ethnicities of those involved in each religion. So we have people who were of Muslim descent tended to be people from Africa or Arab nations, or people who were from countries basically other than Europe, whereas we have Europeans who are much more fair-skinned, more Caucasian, they're whiter. So that basically created a racial divide because of the religious divide that existed. And that kind of led to some really deep-seated discrimination and racism that became present in Europe and then kind of throughout kind of that whole area in the 1600s. So the play takes place in Venice, Italy. And we have the Venetians, who would have been more of the European Christianity type side, where they had a really negative perspective of people who were from the Moor descent, which were people who were Muslim, who were Arab, people from those nations. They had really poor perspective of them. They were kind of natural-born enemies. They really didn't like them. There was a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice, and a lot of racism that happened in the way that they talked about them. That's really present throughout the entire play in Othello, just the way that they talk about Othello as a more kind of the slurs they used to talk about him, the way that they talk about his relationship with Desdemona, different things like that, that we are really clearly able to see the racism that existed there, and that was intentional on Shakespeare's end. He wanted to really make a point about how poorly Moors were being treated at the time. So another thing that's important to talk about, besides kind of these conflicts that existed racially and based on religion, are some of the military hierarchies and some of the expectations that occurred at this time. So within relationships, within marriage, within kind of anything, women were just viewed as much lesser. They were viewed as needing to obey their husbands, and if they weren't married, then they needed to obey their fathers. So Desdemona is kind of a very unique character in that she does defy her father's will, which, as we see in Act 1, leads to her getting kind of shunned by her family. But she does have a really intense obedience to Othello. She's very obedient to him to the point where she's kind of okay with anything that happens, anything that he does to her, which that will come up more later in the play. I don't want to spoil anything. But as a wife, she has an allegiance to her husband. She may not disrespect him. She can't leave him. She can't really stand up for herself in this relationship. And she can't really stand up for herself if other people, especially other men in military rankings, are kind of belittling her for her relationship with Othello. She kind of just has to obey him. He's kind of the leader of her, and she has to follow the sort of expectation that women were meant to be seen and not heard. So that's a little bit about kind of the role that women had to play during this time and what it would look like in a marriage, and kind of use that to understand Desdemona a little bit and why she behaves the way that she does as the play progresses, why she is so obedient to Othello. And that'll make more sense. I'm trying not to spoil anything, but that'll make a lot more sense as we get further in the play and you understand her allegiance to Othello a little bit more. But basically in marriages, the woman had to be really, really loyal to her husband. He was kind of the head of everything, and she just had to obey him. Their marriage is obviously very specific because of the fact that he is a Moor, so he is viewed as more dirty. He's not viewed as lesser in terms of societal value. He's still given a really high military rank, but just in terms of his value as a man, he's really looked down upon. It would be really, really frowned upon for kind of mixed race relationships to happen, mixed religion relationships to happen. It'd be really frowned upon for this marriage to ever happen. So even though Othello is still respected and he's able to have the military ranking that he does have, people really kind of are skeptical about his relationship with Desdemona, and they're also skeptical about his nature. So think about even in early U.S. history, the way that people would talk about African Americans, people would talk about slaves or black people, they would talk about them in really poor terms, compare them to animals, talk about them like they were monkeys and had animal instincts that we had further evolved from as white people. That was a really common belief that was obviously rooted in nothing besides racism. There's absolutely no truth to that, but that was something that was really a widespread belief, was that white people were more evolved and that black people had a lot more innate kind of animal instincts that led them to more violent tendencies, or that prevented them from getting a better education and stuff like that. So really horrible racial beliefs that would have existed in this time as well. So while it would have been believed that Othello could be a good person and a strong soldier, it would have also been believed that he might have had some of these more animal instincts in his nature, that he wasn't as evolved in terms of the way that he might treat women. So that's just a little bit about kind of the relationships and the marital tensions that would have existed at that time. So that's that. And then I also want to talk about a little bit about military hierarchies, just so that you understand kind of what's going on with the hierarchy between Othello and Cassio and Iago. So Othello is the top ranking officer. He's the head in command. He's the general. So he would be the highest military officer. So his allegiance would be to the duke and to any royalty, and to people who were outside of the military, who were kind of deciding what the military would do. But within the military, he was the highest ranking officer. And then below him, his second in command would be his lieutenant, and that is Cassio. He picks Cassio for that role because of their friendship. And then below Cassio, third in command, is Iago, and that would be the ancient, is what it would be called. So he's the third ranking officer. So that's a little bit about the military hierarchy, and that kind of leads us right into Act 1 and the events of Act 1. So I'm going to summarize Act 1 as quick as I can here, just to make sure you guys have a basic understanding of what happened in Act 1. So Act 1 starts with Iago and Rodrigo, who is a friend of Iago's. I say friend loosely because Rodrigo thinks they're friends, but Iago really just uses him to manipulate him. Iago's a pretty crappy dude. So it starts with them walking in the street, talking, and Iago is really, really angry, and we find out through the course of this specific scene, scene 1, that Iago is mad because Othello gave Cassio the second in command position, the position of lieutenant, rather than